Hello, Testing the Wind by Peter Ilgenfritz, a memoir of learning to sail, will be coming out from Coffeetown Press on April 14th. Welcome, Peter. We're going to have Peter read an excerpt from the prologue to the book. Would you read for us?
There are journeys in life we would never choose to take, but we do so anyway because we know that our lives depend on our taking them. In a tippy little boat on a tiny lake in downtown Seattle, I learned to sail. I discovered a practice that helped me let go of the life I had and discover a new life I'd never imagined. Along the way, I crashed into waves of grief and despair, but did not drown. I was tossed by anxiety, but did not die. Instead, I discovered parts of myself I'd never dared to embrace. Eventually, I learned what was on the other side of letting go.
That was a lovely reading and, in a way, a summary and a preview of what the book is about. Thank you for reading that. That's from Testing the Wind by Peter Ilgenfritz. About Peter, for 33 years, Peter Ilgenfritz has served as a pastor in the United Church of Christ. A native of Massachusetts, he served for 25 years as a pastor at University Congregational Church in Seattle before following a call to walk with others through times of change and transition. Peter is a member of the Cho Bo Chi, a Rinzai Zen community in Seattle, and a graduate of Colgate University and Yale Divinity School. His book of poetry, Setting Sail, is available from Lulu Press. Peter can be reached through his website, navigatingthroughchange.com. Peter currently serves as interim pastor at the Congregational Church of Boothbay Harbor, Maine. So let me ask you some questions about your book, Peter, and what it's all about, and you. So from a childhood in the suburbs of the North Shore of Boston, to Yale Divinity School, to being a pastor in Seattle for 25 years, how did this journey lead to learning to sail? What prompted you to want to learn to sail?
Well, I, as you said, Susanna, I think many of the journeys of my life involved a physical movement from one place to another. And for me, from the East Coast to the West Coast. But I found myself these number of years ago in a time when it wasn't just a physical move that was needed, but it was a real emotional move that was needed and a personal growth that was needed. I was going through a tremendous time and a challenging time of change and transition in my life. Towards the end of a long-term relationship in my life, and setting out into a whole new time and not really knowing how to navigate my way there and to be in that. And sailing gave me It gave me a practice, it gave me a focus, and most importantly, it gave me time to really lean into the work of change and the change I was feeling called out into. And it provided me those skills that I needed to move off of the dock of what had been my very familiar life out to sea to discover the new life that I was to find.
Very good. Now, you learned to sail at the Center for Wooden Boats in Seattle. And in the process of learning to sail, what was it about your instructors that inspired you most?
The biggest thing that inspired me about my instructors was that, unlike me, who was an overwhelmed and clutching sailor, my sailing instructors were so present. They were calm, they were aware of everything going on around them. as you need to be to sail, particularly on a little tiny boat. And they were ready to respond in a moment to anything that needed responding to. And they so reminded me of what I'd been learning in the practice of Zen Buddhism. Sitting in the Zendo, that kind of wakeful, still, yet ready to respond presence. And here I was learning about it through these women and men teaching me to sail a boat, and out there in the real world, out there in nature, and who were helping me in that way to learn how I could gain that practice myself, and where that came from.
I see. Now tell us, how did it come to pass on just your second lesson that you found yourself in rough waters and you thought you might die? And what did you think in that moment?
Well, I have to start by saying that sailing came to me as this idea that just wouldn't let go of me. I had this kind of picture of myself out on a sailboat sailing in the South Pacific. And for me, other than being a lovely picture, for me, it ended up being a horrible nightmare because I've been somebody who's never been interested in boats. I never really liked being out on the water. I hate things that are tippy, and I hate wind. But I kept coming back to this picture that I really needed, for some reason, to learn how to sail. And on my second lesson, we went out, and though it looked like a perfect day to sail for me, because there was hardly any wind, we got out into Lake Union and the wind came up. And suddenly everything on the boat was moving. Something was moving across the top of my head, and the boat was tipping up, a good couple of inches above the water. And all I knew was that I was clutching the side of the boat, staring down into the white-capped waves. And I knew that I was going to fall overboard, get tangled up in the lines, tangled up in the sails, and might well drown on my second lesson. And at that time, I remembered a quote that I had first heard in a religion class in college decades before, from H. Richard Niebuhr. And he wrote this. He said, "There is something about life with which we all must reckon. It is the void from which everything comes and to which everything returns, and against it there is no escape." And on that second sailing lesson, I felt like I knew it was me looking right down into that void. And I felt like I was having to face something that I didn't know how to face. And I was going to have to learn how to overcome my fear so that I could face that. And on that second lesson, then, I realized why I needed to learn how to sail.
Very instructive. You've mentioned your faith, and you have this seemingly disparate array of patterns of thought and faiths: Christianity, Buddhism, poetry, sailing, different ways to learn. How do these all come together in you to guide you, these seemingly disparate things?
Well, I think what I know of all of those pieces, be they religious structures, or be they creativity like in painting, or in sailing, they're all practices that are born of something that is beyond words. And you might call it they were born of the spirit. Some might say they're born of God. They're born of something of mystery, something of presence, and all of them grow from their connection to this beyond words experience, reality, and give form to it in a different way. And I know that my call and passion in life is to listen to the spirits, the winds, God's call, and to, with others, seek to discern how that is seeking, where that is seeking, in what form that is seeking to come to life in new and creative and life-giving ways.
Amazing synthesis. Let me ask you, one of the things you learned in sailing, we talked about, is that you learned that you don't sail alone. You learn to sail with other people. I find that fascinating. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I think certainly for me, and perhaps for many of us, if you're in a time of real change and transition, of disruption in your life, it can feel very, very, very alone. And there is a deep aloneness about it. But what sailing really taught me is that we don't find our ways through challenge and change alone, but that we deeply need each other. And I could never have made this journey and continue to make this journey of learning to sail without all of the sailing instructors that have been part of my life, both those literally in a boat and others that have been encouragement, have been askers of good questions, have been accompaniment and presence with me along the way. And so I think more than anything, learning how to sail just made me all the more aware how deeply we need one another and how deeply we need each other right now to find our ways through deeply challenging times.
It is a profound lesson, I should say. And finally, just to sum up, what do you hope your readers will take away from reading your book, Testing the Wind?
Well, I wrote the book because I wanted the book to be an encouragement to other people. Because of my own life experience, I just have a lot of empathy for people who, through choice or through things that are not of their own choice, but are being called out of having to leave that which has been their familiar, beloved dock place of life and step out into a whole new environment in a whole new way and adventure of terror and excitement, perhaps, but of learning how to sail. And so I wrote it to be encouragement to other people. And in writing it as a memoir, what I wanted people to know is that the last thing it's about is being perfect. It's not about having it all figured out, but I wanted people to be able to lean into, as I had to learn how to lean into, their vulnerability, their authenticity, their need for other people, and that in doing so, they would find what they needed and what we all need to find our way forward into the new chapters of our life as individuals and as a community.
Thank you, Peter. That's an eloquent summary and a good stopping place. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about your book.
Thank you, Susanna.
The Wind. You're so welcome.